I love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself. But when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woodsy area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday. Probably a Saturday, because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first, but by the time I realized what was going on, there was already a considerable amount of snow on the ground. Without thinking too much, I instantly knew what I wanted to do. Take a snow walk. So that's what I did. The spot I drove to is pretty secluded for the most part. It's a local hiking trail that usually doesn't see that much traffic. I stepped out, admired the snowfall for a few seconds, and started walking. I didn't really have a defined plan in my mind. My only objective was to get deeper into the woods so I could more fully appreciate the snow. After about 20 minutes of walking, I was finally satisfied with how far I'd gone. But then, the literal moment I stopped to appreciate the snow, I heard something. Something that definitely didn't belong there. It was a child's voice. It took me a few moments to even process what I heard. Just as I was telling myself my mind was playing tricks on me, I heard it again. The sound of a little boy yelling, "Hi." I know that sounds pretty benign, but it was just so freaky in the moment. It was quite literally the last thing I was expecting to hear out there, all alone in those woods. The other unsettling thing about it was that I couldn't really tell where the voice had come from. It sounded like it could have come from a number of different directions, if that makes any sense. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I kept looking around frantically, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I heard the voice again. It was definitely a little boy's voice, only this time he said, "Up here, silly." Without even processing how freaky of a thing that is to say, I instinctively looked up, and there he was. There was a little boy who looked to be around 9 years old, just sitting on a tree branch in a tree not too far away. It was the most bizarre thing. The boy was clearly bundled up for the cold, but how he managed to climb that tree, I had no idea. The lowest branch to the ground was at least 20 feet off the ground. Strangely, seeing him kind of calmed me down a little. It was almost like I had been afraid of not knowing where he was, as opposed to him being there. I walked over to the tree he was sitting on, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. He was smiling this really wide grin that reminded me of the expression someone who hadn't learned to smile yet would make. My sense of security started disappearing the more I looked around, though. For starters, there wasn't a single footprint around the tree he was sitting in, meaning he had climbed up there before it had started snowing, meaning he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he figured out a way to climb that thing in the first place. Like I said, it would have been exceedingly difficult to do so, even if you had climbing experience. The tree was perfectly straight. He would have had to shimmy up 20 feet. He waved at me, and I didn't waste a second. I asked him how he got up there, and he told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to smiling that awful grin. I didn't know what to do. This kid clearly didn't belong out there, and I felt compelled to do something. But what was I supposed to do? Try and climb the tree to get him down? Before I could think of something to say, he stood up straight on the branch he had been sitting on and said, "Watch this." Then, without warning, he leaned back and fell. He fell what must have been at least 30 feet. I screamed. There was nothing else I could do. I watched in horror as he landed directly on his back with a gruesome thud. I thought he was dead. There's no way any amount of snow could have cushioned that fall. I ran over to him, but before I could reach him, he sprung up off the ground and started running away from me. It was impossible. Falling from that height should have been enough to kill him. I screamed again, this time out of shock, and I watched as he ran off deeper into the woods. Even with the bright snow on the ground, it was still dark enough for him to run out of sight.
I don't know what came over me. Instead of doing the rational thing and turning around, I ran after him. I don't know why. I know myself. If a situation like that were to arise again, I'd turn around 99 times out of 10. But I guess this was just that one time. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I regained my composure and started following his footprints, knowing he couldn't have gotten far. After a few seconds of running, I started hearing him laughing. Cackling is a better word. Honestly, it was really unsettling. It was like he was toying with me, playing a game while I was out there scared to death. His footprints passed a nearby tree, and as I was running past, I felt something latch onto my back. Before I could react, I was tumbling to the ground, and this kid was on top of me, clawing at my neck and shoulders. I started screaming and blindly grabbed at him, but he wasn't letting go. He started wailing too, and I could feel myself starting to bleed. He was tearing into my neck with his fingernails, and I thought he was going to blind me. I managed to stand back up, and with all my strength, I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground, immediately got up, and ran deeper into the woods, still laughing. This time, I didn't chase him. If it weren't for the cuts on my neck and the blood on my hands, I might have just stood there forever. The cuts didn't feel that deep, but there was an uncomfortable amount of blood. I hadn't been wearing a scarf, so I pulled off my hat and wrapped it tightly around my neck. My hands were shaking and soaked with my own blood, and I was having a panic attack. The next 20 minutes are really fuzzy, probably because I was so terrified and I had lost so much blood. The next thing I remember is being in the back of an ambulance, and then after that, I remember talking to some police officers about what happened. I got the medical attention I needed and was asked to recount my story like 10 times. At the time, I didn't realize what was so unbelievable about it. I would only later learn that while I had been in the hospital, the police had searched the area and found nothing. What's worse, they had allegedly followed my footprints and only found the one set, mine. I remember being so emotionally distraught when I found that out. I was furious at the thought that they hadn't searched the woods thoroughly. But why would they lie? By the time I was discharged from the hospital and done talking to police officers, I didn't have much energy to do anything other than sleep. I can't remember if this was the day after or 2 days after. Like I said, things got a bit fuzzy. But eventually, I went back to that hiking trail. It had snowed considerably since then, so it wasn't too surprising to find that my footprints had been snowed in. I searched the entire forest. It must have taken me hours, but there was no sign anyone had been there. This is still one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me or anyone I personally know.
This happened over winter break, my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and had the house to myself for a little under 2 weeks. During the second week, a massive snowstorm hit. The forecasts were predicting something crazy, and they definitely weren't lying. By the time I woke up that Saturday, there was already close to a foot on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. Plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads were basically impassable. I should mention that my neighborhood isn't your typical suburban setup. The houses are pretty spread out, and there's a lot of wooded areas between properties. It's nice in the summer, but in the winter, it can feel kind of isolated. That day, with the snow piling up and no cars on the road, it felt even more so. I was bored out of my mind by like 6 p.m. The Wi-Fi knocked out while I was sleeping, so I couldn't even pass the time by playing video games or anything. For context, my only hometown friend is this guy named Ryan, and I knew he was around because I had literally hung out with him the day before. So, while I was dying of boredom in my room, I got this idea that I thought was hilarious at the time. I was going to walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were undrivable, sure, but I figured I could make it on foot. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd walked further than that plenty of times. Looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea, but I was 19 and bored and thought it would be funny to just show up on his doorstep covered in snow. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. The snow had stopped falling by then, and everything was covered in this thick white blanket. The streetlights made everything glow, and it was weirdly peaceful. I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots, but that was about it. There wasn't a living thing out there. About halfway there, the route cuts through this stretch where there aren't any houses for a while. It's mostly just trees on both sides of the road and a few empty lots.
During the day, it's nothing special, but that night, especially with all that snow, it felt different. That's when it really hit me how alone I was. It was a really strange feeling. I kept walking, and out of nowhere, I saw headlights up ahead. The lights were pretty far off, but they were coming from the direction I was headed. I stopped walking and watched them get closer. It was definitely a snowplow, and it was moving really slowly. But then, out of nowhere, it suddenly veered hard to the right, like the driver had lost control or was trying to avoid something. I watched them cut across the road and disappear into the tree line. There was this muffled crunching sound, and then everything went quiet again. My first thought was that someone had just crashed, so I started running toward where I'd seen the lights go off the road. The snow was deep and I couldn't move that fast, but the only thing on my mind was the thought that someone was hurt and needed help. It took me a few minutes to reach the spot. I could see where the vehicle had gone off the road, so I followed the tire tracks until I found it. The scene looked exactly as I'd predicted, a snowplow with its front end crumpled and smashed into a tree. Its headlights were still on and the engine was still running. I ran up to the driver's side, preparing myself to have to lift someone through the snow, but when I got to the window and looked inside, there was no one there. The driver's seat was empty. I stood there for a second, not really processing what I was seeing. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown from the vehicle or something, so I looked around. The windshield wasn't shattered though, so they must have still been inside the plow. I checked the passenger side, but that seat was also empty. I ended up pulling the driver's door open in frustration, thinking maybe they'd slumped down below the steering wheel, but there was no one there either. It took me a few seconds to realize that the entire plow was empty. There was quite literally nowhere else someone could have been. I remember just standing there in the snow, staring at this wrecked snowplow with its headlights still on and its engine still running, feeling like something was very, very wrong. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. Whoever had been driving the thing had just vanished. It's hard for me to describe what I felt next. I got this sudden, overwhelming sense that I needed to leave. It wasn't a thought so much as a feeling, like something in my gut was forcing me to get out of there. I trusted my gut and backed away from the plow. As I was walking back the way I had come, I heard a voice ring out from somewhere behind me. It was a man's voice, and he was yelling for help. I wanted to turn around and help. That was my goal in the first place. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving. I started running, and as I got further away, I heard the voice yell out one more time. It sounded much closer the second time, like impossibly close. No one could have moved that fast through such deep snow. I didn't turn around. I ran the entire rest of the way to Ryan's house. The joke was pretty much ruined at that point. I must have looked insane when his mom answered the door. I explained what happened, and Ryan's dad ended up calling the police. In the time it took the police to get out there and back amidst all that snow, Ryan and I had gone back and forth about what I'd seen probably a dozen times. He kept asking if maybe I imagined it or if maybe the driver had walked away before I got there, but I knew for a fact that my eyes hadn't been playing tricks on me. When the police got to Ryan's house, they revealed something horrifying. Apparently, they hadn't found any tire tracks on that road at all. They had searched the entire road, but there was no sign that a plow had ever even been there. The officer actually accused me of making the entire thing up, and I had to argue my case. I was practically begging them to believe me. The officer ended up just leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed at Ryan's that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark, and honestly, I don't think I could have even if I wanted to. The next morning, after the plows had finally cleared the roads, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then, and every time I do, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that what happened to me is just one of those unexplainable things. I guess it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing, but that terrifies me just as much. I'm Sebastian, and I go by Sebi. This happened back when I was a sophomore in high school about 7 years ago now. I went to a private school in a nearby city, which meant I had to commute on public transportation every day. Train in the morning, train in the afternoon. It sounds tedious, but honestly, I didn't mind it. Most of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd all ride together, and it became this social thing where we'd just hang out and talk during the commute. One of the hidden benefits of private school, honestly, getting people accustomed to commuting early in life.
I was a runner back then, track in the spring, cross country in the fall. During the off-season, I'd catch the train right after school let out around 3, and it would be pretty empty, usually just the same group of high schoolers heading home. But during the season, practice wouldn't wrap up until after 5:30, which meant by the time I got in the train, it was packed with commuters heading back to the suburbs after work. Luckily, my two best friends, Charles and James, also ran track and lived on the same train line, so I wasn't completely alone during those late rides. One night after track practice, it started snowstorming the moment our train left the station. It was mid-inter, so night is definitely the right term, even though it wasn't even 6 yet. And snowstorm is also the right term, because it went from 0 to full-on blizzard in like 5 minutes. We found out while we were on the train that ours was the last one operating on that track. The forecast was predicting a massive storm, and they weren't letting any more trains leave the station after us. The snow only got worse. At one point, the three of us were genuinely wondering if the train was even going to make it to each of our stops. And even so, we quickly realized there was no way our parents could drive to pick us up. The roads were already a mess. So even if we made it to our respective stations, we'd have no choice but to walk home. For James and Charles, that wasn't a huge deal. They were practically next-door neighbors in a pretty lively, dense part of town. Plus, their houses weren't that far from the station. For me, though, it was different. My station was isolated. I'd have to cross a highway and then walk over a mile in this woodsy stretch to get home. I called my parents from the train and explained the situation. They told me I didn't have much of a choice. My dad told me to just suck it up, bundle up, and be careful. James and Charles got off at their stop, and I dapped them goodbye. The rest of the ride was just me and a handful of other passengers, and by the time we reached my station, I was the only one left. The doors opened, and I stepped out onto the platform. It was completely empty, just me and a full blizzard. It was dark, but there was decent visibility because of the snow. Everything was white, and the light from the station reflected off of it in this pretty but eerie way. I stood there for a second, taking it in. It was a sight I had never seen before. Usually that station is bustling with cars and people, but with the snowstorm and all, it looked completely deserted. I started walking. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. For whatever reason, I thought crossing the highway would have been more difficult, but there wasn't a single car anywhere in sight, including snowplows. I actually stopped and looked around, kind of in awe. It was beautiful in a weird way. I started thinking to myself, I'd probably never experience anything like that ever again. After the highway, though, came the woods. The only other option was following the road home, but it was really windy and would have added a ton more walking, so I decided to just push through and walk through the woods. I don't know how long I'd been walking, but I happened to glance up after looking down at my feet for a while, and the moment I did, I had to hold back a yell. About 30 yards ahead of me, there was someone standing there, a man. He was facing me directly, almost like he knew the exact path I had to take. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing short-sleeved shirt and shorts in the middle of a blizzard. And to make things worse, his face was twisted in this deranged smile. I didn't move. I just stood there watching him, waiting to see what he was going to do. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation, but the shock of the situation was too much for me to handle. I couldn't think or move. And in one abrupt motion, he went from smiling and standing still to screaming and charging at me. It was literal horror unfolding right in front of me. I snapped out of my haze and began running as fast as I could back the way I came, screaming for help even though I knew no one was out there. I couldn't move that fast with all the snow, and I felt him closing the gap with every second that passed. The chase felt like it lasted forever. It was probably 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the road, and only then did I turn around. He was gone, and that didn't make me feel much better, though. I felt physically sick. I followed the road home, and the whole time I kept thinking about my footprints, about how they were quite literally the only tracks in the snow. If that guy wanted to follow me home, it would have been the easiest thing in the world. When I finally got to my house, my parents were relieved. That is, until I told them what had happened in the woods. My dad wanted to go out and look for the guy, but my mom wouldn't let him. Several hours went by without incident. Eventually, my parents went to sleep. I pretended like everything was fine, but I was still freaking out internally. I couldn't get the image of his deranged smile out of my head, and the way he had been screaming was just so unnatural. And the more I thought about it, the more insane the whole thing felt. He had literally been wearing short sleeves. How would he not freeze to death out there?
I was making myself crazy, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and just go to sleep. But of course, I couldn't fall asleep. It was like I was in that 30-second shock after waking up from a nightmare, only instead of 30 seconds, it was several hours. That's the best way I can describe how I was feeling. At one point, I heard a tree branch rattle my bedroom window, which startled me out of bed. I went over to the window to see if I could dislodge it somehow. I pulled back the curtain and literally dropped to the floor yelling. It was him, that guy from earlier. He was right there, inches from my window, only now I could see him clearly. His skin was purple, like he was freezing to death, and he was bald with this patchy gray beard. My dad burst into the room and just barely saw that guy through the window before he took off. My dad went to go run out in the snow, but my mom stopped him and convinced him to call the police instead, which he did. With all the snow on the grounds, it took the police forever to get to our house. By the time they did, that guy was long gone. My dad didn't care though. The police could easily have tracked his footprints in the snow, which is what I was expecting them to do. But once the officers realized the tracks led into the woods behind our house, they told us they couldn't just be tramping through the woods in the middle of the night. My dad got furious. He got in one of the officers' faces and almost made it physical. In the end, the officers literally left without doing anything. Nothing ever came of it. The police never bothered to follow up, and I never saw that man again, for all I know.
This incident happened about 3 years ago, just a few days before Christmas. Specifically, it was December 20th. At the time, I was living alone in a rental house just outside Salem, Massachusetts. It wasn't exactly isolated, but the houses were spaced far enough apart that if you screamed, your neighbors probably wouldn't hear you unless their windows were open. And since it was winter, nobody's windows were open. I've always been the type who checks the locks 3 times before bed. I'm cautious, but nothing prepares you for something like this. I came home from work around 4:30 in the afternoon. It was already getting dark because of the season. As I walked up the porch steps, I saw a package sitting on the welcome mat. A medium-sized box wrapped in plain brown paper. No bow, no holiday print, and strangely, no shipping label. I picked it up. It felt light. My first thought was that my mom, Karen, had dropped it off. She lives about an hour away and is famous for leaving early Christmas gifts without warning. She's terrible at waiting for the actual day. I figured she drove by while I was at work, left it, and forgot to text me. I brought the box inside, kicked off my boots, and locked the door behind me. I carried it into the kitchen and grabbed scissors. I wasn't scared at all. Why would I be? I was smiling, wondering what random gift my mom had picked this time. I cut the tape and opened the flaps. Inside was a layer of bubble wrap. I pulled it away and saw a simple black wooden picture frame. I turned it over, expecting a family photo or maybe a picture of my dog. My stomach dropped. The smile vanished instantly. It was a photograph of me. In the picture, I was standing at my kitchen sink washing dishes. I was wearing the same gray hoodie I had worn the night before. Steam rose from the hot water. The angle was from outside, taken through the kitchen window. The darkness of the yard framed the shot. I froze, gripping the frame. My brain scrambled. Who took this? The picture was sharp, not blurry. Someone had stood in my backyard, right up against the glass, and taken a photo of me while I was completely unaware, listening to music and scrubbing a pan. Suddenly, the silence in the house felt heavy. My cell phone, sitting on the counter next to the box, began to ring. The sound was so loud in the quiet kitchen that I jumped. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. Normally, I don't answer those, but my thumb hit the green button before I could stop myself. I put the phone to my ear, saying nothing. For 3 seconds, silence. Then a heavy, wet sound. Breathing, like someone catching their breath in the cold air. A deep, scratchy male voice spoke. "Did you like it?" My blood ran cold. I hung up immediately. I didn't respond. I dropped the phone and scrambled to check the back door. Locked. Check the front door. Locked. My heart hammered against my ribs.
I felt exposed. I grabbed my phone again to dial 911. Crash. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the kitchen. I screamed and dropped to the floor, covering my head. Cold air rushed in. I looked up. The very window where the photo had been taken, the one above the sink, was shattered. Glass covered the counter and floor. In the middle of the kitchen lay a rock the size of a baseball. I shook so hard I could barely stand. I knew I had to get out, but I couldn't stop staring at the rock. A piece of notebook paper was secured to it with a rubber band. I shouldn't have gone near it. I should have run straight to the bedroom and locked the door. But shock took over. I crawled forward, grabbed the rock, pulled off the paper, and unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged and messy. It read, "I have more." Panic set in. I ran into the hallway, away from the broken window, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is at my house. They threw a rock through my window. They're watching me. Okay, ma'am. Officers are on the way. Are you in a safe place? I'm in the hallway. Everything is locked. Stay on the line. As I huddled there, clutching the phone, a horrifying thought hit me. The note said, "I have more." More pictures? My cell phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from a blocked number. I pulled it away from my ear to look. It was an image file. I opened it. Tears stung my eyes. The picture wasn't taken outside. It was taken inside my bedroom. It showed me sleeping in bed. The timestamp was 3 a.m. that morning. He hadn't just been outside. He had been inside. While I slept, he stood over me, took a picture, and left without me knowing. "Ma'am, are you there?" the dispatcher asked. "He was inside," I choked. "He has a picture of me sleeping." Then I heard it. Snow crunching. Not from the backyard, from the front porch. Heavy boots on the wooden planks. The floorboards creaked. He wasn't leaving. He was coming to the front door. I scrambled backward, retreating up the stairs, trying to put distance between us. The doorknob rattled violently. He wasn't quiet anymore. He shook the door, testing the deadbolt. "He's at the door," I cried. "Please hurry." "They're 2 minutes out, ma'am." 2 minutes is a lifetime when someone is breaking in. The rattling stopped. For a moment, I thought he gave up. Then a heavy thud slammed the door. He threw his body weight against it. The wood groaned, the frame shuddered. I ran into the bathroom upstairs and locked the door, the only room with no windows big enough to crawl through. I sat in the empty bathtub, pulled the curtain closed, clutching a bottle of bleach as a weapon. Downstairs, a loud crack. The front door frame gave way. Heavy boots echoed on my hardwood floor. I held my breath, clamping my hand over my mouth to stop sobbing. He wasn't rushing. He walked slowly. "I know you like the pictures," the voice called, from the bottom of the stairs, the same voice from the phone. His foot hit the first step. Then sirens. Blue and red lights flashed against the bathroom tiles, shining through the vent window. The wail of sirens was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The footsteps stopped. He ran back towards the kitchen. The back door slammed open. Police shouted, "Police, show me your hands." I stayed in that bathtub for 10 minutes until a female officer knocked and told me it was safe. They never caught him. Footprints led from my back door into the woods, disappearing onto a plowed road a mile away. They swept the house. What they found made me move out the next day. In my bedroom closet, hidden behind winter coats, they found a small sleeping bag and empty food wrappers. Police estimated he had been living there for at least 3 days, watching me, waiting for me to sleep so he could come out. The package on the porch was just his way of saying the game had begun. Now, I live in a 3rd-floor apartment, cameras in every room. But sometimes, when I'm washing dishes at night, I can't bring myself to look at the window. I'm too afraid of what I might see looking back.
When I was 10, my life flipped upside down. My parents split. For reasons I didn't understand, I moved in with my dad. I went from a busy neighborhood full of kids I knew to a quiet suburb where I didn't know anyone. The transition was rough. My dad tried, but he worked long hours. I spent most days wandering the house or sitting on the porch, bored. The only saving grace was a family down the street, a single mom with 3 kids. The middle child was a girl named Ashley. She was 12, 2 years older than me. At that age, it felt like a big gap, but she was kind enough to let me tag along. We weren't best friends, more like friends of convenience. Our parents were close, so we ended up together at dinners and barbecues. Over time, the age gap shrank. By 12 and 14, we shared the same circle of friends. One of those friends was Ethan. This happened a week before Christmas. The neighborhood was glowing, lights on every house, snow on the ground, everyone waiting for winter break. One night, Ashley's mom was working late. She was a social worker. I never knew her exact title, only that she helped people through hard times. Ashley and her younger brother, 9 years old, were home alone. Ethan went over. Looking back, I know he had a crush on Ashley. He wasn't supposed to be there without her mom. Parents in our neighborhood were strict. The plan was simple: leave before her mom's car pulled in. I was at my dad's house playing video games, unaware of what was happening. According to Ethan, they sat in the living room watching TV. Ashley's brother played in another room. Around 8 o'clock, they heard a knock. Not a normal knock. Ashley's mom had a rhythm: 2 taps, pause, then 3 more. She used it when she forgot her keys. Ashley froze, wide-eyed. She thought her mom was home early. Ethan panicked. He bolted to the back, opened the laundry room window, climbed out, dropped into the snow. He sprinted through yards, all the way home, relieved. He thought he escaped. But it wasn't Ashley's mom. Ashley unlocked the deadbolt, swung the door open. A stranger stood there. Later, police explained the woman was the sister of a client Ashley's mom had been helping. That client had severe mental health issues. The sister had just been released from an institution. She became obsessed. She blamed Ashley's mom, maybe for interfering, maybe delusion. Nobody knows. But she stalked her, learned her schedule, learned her house, learned the secret knock. When Ashley opened the door, the woman forced her way inside. Ashley's brother heard the commotion. He peeked out, saw a stranger attacking his sister. He didn't scream. He ran out the back door, same direction Ethan had gone. He pounded on the neighbor's door until they answered. They called 911. I woke to sirens. Not one, dozens. My dad rushed in, told me to stay away from the window, but I looked. Red and blue lights filled the street, blinding against the snow. An ambulance sat still, not leaving. That's always a bad sign. The details came days later, hard to process. Ashley was murdered, brutally. Police found the woman waiting in the living room, calm, no fight. Ashley's body was in the bathroom, dragged, left in the tub, naked. The worst part, the part that made my dad vomit, Ashley had been decapitated. At first, police couldn't find her head. The house was decorated, tree in the corner, presents underneath. They searched, and they found it. Wrapped, hidden among the Christmas gifts. The pit in my stomach was unbearable. It felt unreal, like a slasher movie, not real life, not Ashley. Ethan was destroyed. He kept saying, I should have stayed, I should have fought, maybe she'd be alive. But the truth, if Ethan had stayed, there would have been 2 bodies. The woman had a hunting knife, surprise on her side. Ethan was just a kid. He couldn't have stopped her. I wasn't allowed at the funeral. My dad said it was too much. He was right. Closed casket. Christmas that year was canceled. No lights, no gifts, nothing. I have never told this story to anyone, Not my wife, not my brother, and certainly not the police, because I knew that speaking up would only put my family at risk. And sometimes doing the right thing simply isn't worth the danger when you have people you love depending on you. It happened 4 years ago, in early December, when my wife Katie decided she wanted a real Christmas tree instead of the usual pre-cut fir from the Home Depot lot. And after seeing something online about going into the national forest to cut your own, she thought it would be a beautiful tradition to start. I agreed, but because of our schedules, I couldn't go on the weekend, so I took a half day off work on a Tuesday, planning to surprise Katie and our daughter Leah, who was 5 at the time, with a fresh tree waiting in the living room. I drove my Ford up into the mountains where you can buy a $10 permit to cut a tree in certain zones, but I kept driving past the main areas because they looked picked over and I wanted something perfect, eventually finding a dirt service road that wound deeper into the forest, still legal but far more remote. By the time I parked, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, the sun already sinking low and the light turning gray and flat, the air biting cold at around 20 degrees, and after pulling on my gloves and grabbing the handsaw, I locked the truck and stepped into the tree line. The woods were silent, unnervingly so, with only the crunch of 6 inches of snow under my boots, and after about 15 minutes, I came across a clearing where a noble fir stood tall and flawless, 7 feet high, exactly what I was looking for. I knelt down and began sawing, realizing quickly how much harder it is to cut a fresh tree than people imagine, sweat building under my jacket as the saw screeched rhythmically against the trunk. And that was when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of snow compressing under footsteps. I froze, the saw stopping mid-cut, and the noise stopped too, as if whoever was there had halted the moment I did, and I called out, "Hello?" But the only answer was the wind whispering through the pine needles. Convincing myself it was another person searching for a tree, or maybe just a deer, I forced myself to keep sawing, faster now, though the prickling sensation on the back of my neck told me I was being watched. And when the trunk finally gave way and the tree toppled, I grabbed it immediately and began dragging it toward the road. Dragging a tree through snow is exhausting, and when I stopped to catch my breath, I glanced back at the tree line, only to see a dark shape about 50 yards away, tall and human, ducking behind a spruce the instant I turned my head, and panic surged through me as I realized this was no animal. I didn't call out again, I just gripped the trunk tighter and moved faster, but the footsteps returned, heavier now, pounding through the snow, and suddenly they were running, chasing, closing in. I dropped the tree and sprinted, my heart hammering in my throat, branches snapping behind me as the pursuer crashed through the brush, and when I burst out onto the service road, I fumbled desperately for my keys, hitting unlock and reaching for the driver's side door. That was when I saw the truck leaning oddly to the left, and looking down, I realized both tires on the driver's side had been slashed, the rubber shredded into ribbons, and my stomach dropped as the truth hit me. This was no coincidence. I had been set up. The crunching of snow came again, not just from the woods but from the road ahead, and when I spun around, I saw 3 men approaching, dressed in heavy camo jackets and dark jeans, their faces hidden behind black ski masks, and from the tree line the figure who had chased me stepped out, also masked, surrounding me completely. I raised my keys, stammering, "Take the truck, take whatever you want." But the biggest man didn't answer. He rushed me, slamming me into the side of the truck so hard my head cracked against the metal and stars exploded in my vision. And before I could recover, the others were on me, fists and boots raining down until I curled into the snow, trying to shield my head. "Grab him," one growled, and 2 of them hauled me up, pinning me against the door as blood poured from my nose, while the leader ripped my wallet and phone from my pocket, his voice calm and terrifying as he ordered me to unlock the screen. When I hesitated, asking why, he drove his fist into my stomach, leaving me gasping, and with shaking hands I used my thumbprint to open the screen, watching helplessly as he scrolled through my photos, my notes, my contacts, before pulling out my driver's license and reading my name aloud.
"Robert," he said, then my address, and finally he turned the phone toward me, showing a picture I had taken of Leah on her first day of kindergarten, standing proudly in front of the school sign, and his voice cut through me like ice as he muttered, "Cute kid, Leah, right? Creekwood Elementary." The blood in my veins froze, and I begged him to take the money and leave my family alone. But he leaned in close, the stench of stale tobacco seeping through his mask, and whispered that they were keeping the phone and wallet, that I would stay put until they were long gone, and when I finally called for help, I would say I hit something sharp on the road. Then he tightened his grip on my collar and warned me that if I went to the cops, if I described the masks, if I gave any detail at all, they knew where I slept, they knew where Leah went to school, and they knew exactly what time she stood at the bus stop, pausing long enough for the threat to sink in before asking if I understood. I nodded, choking out, "Yes, I understand." And with that, he shoved me down into the snow, the four of them walking calmly down the road to a rusted SUV hidden in the brush, driving away without looking back. I lay there for 20 minutes, terrified they would return if I moved, until finally I staggered to my feet, bruised, bleeding, and freezing, my truck useless, forcing me to walk 3 miles down the mountain before I found cell service and flagged down an older couple who let me use their phone. But I didn't call the police. I called Katie, telling her I'd blown a tire and slid into a ditch, that I lost my phone in the snow while trying to dig the truck out, and when I got home that night, I hugged Leah so tightly she complained I was squeezing her too hard. 3 months later, we moved, and I told Katie it was because of a job offer in another state, but the truth was I had quit, because I couldn't stand living in that house knowing that somewhere out there, 3 masked men knew exactly where my daughter slept. I waited a day before canceling the credit cards, just to avoid looking suspicious, and I never reported the assault, because silence was the only protection I left.
I really hope the title of the story is an exaggeration, but I'll tell it exactly the way it happened. It was back in 2016, during a bitter Michigan winter, when I was about 8 months into a new job at a mid-size insurance office just outside Lansing. We were a close-knit team of about 25 people, and for the most part, everyone got along. Some coworkers were friendlier than others, but no one ever truly bothered me. Until Jeremy was hired. Jeremy joined about 3 months before the end of the year, working in claims processing, an entry-level role, and he sat just 2 cubicles away from me. At first, he seemed normal enough, quiet, tall, lanky, with perpetually greasy brown hair, and always wearing those same dark green sweaters, even when it wasn't cold. I thought he was a little odd, but people have quirks, right? The first truly unsettling thing I noticed was how he stared. He wouldn't do it face to face. If you spoke directly to him, he barely looked at you. But if I was at the copier, making coffee, or turning a corner, I'd catch him watching. He'd stand at his desk and just stare. At first, I thought maybe I had something on my shirt, or maybe he was just spacing out, but it kept happening. Every time I looked up from my screen, his eyes were there, too wide, lingering too long. I mentioned it once jokingly to my friend Carla in underwriting. "That new guy, Jeremy, he's a bit strange, huh?" She shrugged, said he was probably shy, and told me I was overthinking it, so I tried to let it go. But a week later, Jeremy started whispering under his breath whenever I walked by his desk. I couldn't always make out the words, but sometimes I caught fragments like, "Yeah, there you go," or, "That's right." It didn't make sense. I'd glance over and he'd be typing or flipping through a file, acting as if nothing had happened. It was uncomfortable, but I didn't feel like I had enough to go to HR. Then things escalated. One snowy morning in early December, I found a note under my keyboard. The handwriting was small and spidery, and it read, "I like the way you move." I had no idea who wrote it, though I had my suspicions. I showed it to Carla, and she gave me a concerned look, telling me I should report it. But I convinced myself it was a one-time prank and ignored it. The notes didn't stop. Every couple of days, another one appeared, tucked inside a claim folder, slipped behind my monitor. Messages like, "I can smell your shampoo," or "That blouse looks nice on you." It was enough to make me change my shampoo and stop wearing that blouse. I know it sounds silly, but I felt like I had to respond somehow. Paranoia set in. My eyes darted around the office trying to figure out who was watching me so closely.
Most coworkers were normal, friendly people, but Jeremy was the only one who gave me that unsettling feeling. Without proof, though, what could I do? The Friday before our office Christmas party, I stayed late to finish reports. By 6:30, the floor was nearly empty. On my way to the bathroom, I passed the kitchenette and saw Jeremy sitting alone at a table in the dark, with only the soda machine glowing beside him. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, watching me walk by. I forced a polite smile, but inside I was panicking. Why was he still there? Why was he sitting in the dark? I packed up immediately and half-jogged to my car through the snowy lot. Monday came, and so did the Christmas party. It was held in the big conference room, a potluck lunch, cheap wine, a white elephant exchange. I stuck close to Carla, hoping Jeremy wouldn't show, but of course, he did. Same dark green sweater, standing off to the side, sipping from a plastic cup, watching. Our eyes met once, and he gave me an awkward half-smile. I looked away fast. Later, as people drifted back to their desks, I stepped out to get water. On my way back, Jeremy appeared behind me. "I have something to show you," he said. Panic surged. I told him I was busy, but he insisted, nodding towards a dark meeting room nearby. I tried to decline, but he stepped closer, towering over me, smelling of stale coffee, sweat glistening at his hairline. He touched my elbow, lightly but firmly, guiding me towards the door. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I called out for Carla, but the hallway was empty, the noise from the party muffled behind glass doors. I pulled away, but he grabbed my wrist harder than anyone ever had and forced me inside the dark room that smelled of cardboard and dust. "Stop it, Jeremy," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He pushed me deeper into the shadows. I fought back, kicking his shin. He grunted, tried to cover my mouth, but I bit his fingers. He yelped, startled, fear flashing in his eyes as if he hadn't expected resistance. That was my chance. I lunged sideways, slipped around him, and raced for the door. He grabbed at my coat, but I tore free, flung the door open, and sprinted into the hallway, straight into Carla and our manager, Rob. They saw me panicked, Jeremy right behind, trying to act casual but failing. Carla shouted, "What the hell is going on?" Rob stepped forward, blocking Jeremy. Within the hour, I was in HR, telling them everything. The notes, the stares, the lurking, and now the attack. The police were called. Jeremy was fired immediately. He didn't deny it. He just glared at me as security dragged him out. The police asked if I wanted to press charges. I did. But the weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork. Without cameras in that room, it was my word against his. The notes had no proof. Most coworkers hadn't witnessed anything. The police said charges might not stick. The company didn't push it either. Jeremy disappeared. I never saw him again. Maybe he moved, maybe he went underground. For weeks, I checked my rearview mirror constantly, took different routes home, lived in fear. The worst part was knowing he got away with it. Losing his job wasn't enough. He could be anywhere now, working somewhere else, doing the same thing to someone else. I've since moved to another job, one where I feel safer. But I'll never forget Jeremy and the Christmas party that almost ended very, very badly.
The silence of a snowed-in city is unnerving. Portland doesn't shut down for a few inches, but this was a proper Willamette Valley winter storm, 13 inches and counting. The power had flickered twice, and the world outside my apartment window was a soundless, swirling white. I was grateful for the work, a rush editing job for a true crime podcaster due before New Year's, and the solitude felt perfect. Until it didn't. It began with the heating system, a low, irregular knock in the walls. Knock, 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 then silence for an hour. Old building, I told myself, pipes contracting in the cold. I poured another coffee, pulled the space heater closer, and kept working. By 3 in the afternoon, the knocks had changed. They became rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Faint, buried in the plaster, but too precise to be random. I muted my music and listened. It stopped. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a branch, but the oak outside was still. I tried to refocus on the transcript in front of me, a chilling account of a home invasion, but the words blurred as the tapping returned. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. My eyes drifted to the shared wall with the adjacent apartment, 4B. Vacant since Mrs. Gable moved to assisted living in November. The landlord, Murdoch, had said he wouldn't show it until after the holidays. At dusk, the knocking stopped. Relief was short-lived. A new sound began, a slow, grating drag. Heavy furniture shifting across bare floorboards. Drag. Stop. Drag. Stop. Positioning something. I called Murdoch, straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Liam in 4A. Loud noises next door in 4B. Sounds like someone's moving in. In this storm? Just checking." I hung up, feeling foolish, the paranoid neighbor. The dragging ceased. Night fell, the storm intensifying. My desk lamp cast a warm pool of light, but the corners of the room deepened. Delivery was impossible, storm lockdown. I was trapped with my work and the silence from next door. Then the humming started. Low, tuneless, masculine, felt more than heard, vibrating in my molars. The sound of someone absorbed in a task, content. Every hair on my arms rose. Someone was definitely in there. A squatter? A handyman Murdoch forgot to mention? I pressed my ear to the plaster. The hum stopped. Silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then a voice, muffled, conversational, calm, answering a question I hadn't asked. Panic surged. This wasn't random. This was someone settling in. The knocks, the dragging, the hum, it was a process. I called the non-emergency police line. 12 minutes on hold. I listened, one ear to the phone, the other straining toward the wall. The voice had stopped. Finally, "Portland Police, what's your emergency?" "I think there's an intruder in the vacant apartment next to mine. I've been hearing moving, humming, talking. The landlord said it was empty." The dispatcher's voice was tired, professional. "Sir, are you in immediate danger? Do you see or hear anyone attempting to enter your unit?" "No, but with the storm, response to burglary in progress calls is extended. We can send an officer when available, but it may be a while. Can you secure your residence and avoid the area?" It was a polite way of saying I was on my own. I hung up, locked the deadbolt, set the chain, and grabbed the fire poker. Pathetic protection. I tried to work, but every sense was tuned to the wall. For an hour, nothing, just the wind. Maybe the police had come quietly. Maybe it was a handyman who'd left. I needed to know. The not knowing was worse. I crept to the front door, peered through the peephole. The hallway was dim, lit by a single sconce. Carpet clean, no footprints, no sign of anyone. The door to 4B was 8 feet away, dark wood, tarnished brass number. As I watched, the thin line of yellow light beneath 4B's door vanished. Someone had just turned off the lights inside. They were standing in the dark, right there. I closed the peephole, heart hammering. Why turn the lights off? To sleep? Or to watch under my door? To move unseen? I retreated to my bedroom, the farthest room from the wall, barricaded the door with a dresser, a flimsy gesture, but it was something. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, listening to the silence. The heater whirred, the fridge clicked on. Normal sounds. They did nothing to ease the terror. Then the first scrape. Metallic, sharp, from my kitchen, not the wall, my apartment. I froze. Another scrape, deliberate, testing, like a knife tip drawn along a baseboard. Impossible. The doors were locked, the windows frozen shut, but the sound was here. The scraping stopped. A drawer slid open, smooth, quiet. I hadn't left it open. I never leave drawers open. This was the violation. They weren't just next door. They were showing me they could be anywhere,
in the walls, in the pipes, in the structure, or in my head. Then, dripping, wet clicks on tile, sporadic, drip, click, drip. I couldn't stay in the bedroom. Helplessness would choke me. I shoved the dresser aside, grabbed the fire poker, and edged toward the kitchen. The living room was dark, lit only by the blue standby light of my monitor. The dripping stopped. The apartment was unnaturally still. I lunged for the switch, flooding the kitchen in harsh fluorescent glare. Empty, spotless, every drawer shut, sink dry, no puddle, no knife. Relief tangled with confusion. Stress, isolation, the grim work I was editing, it had conjured it. Hallucinations. I leaned against the counter, weak and shaky. Then, static. My computer speaker blared. I jumped. The monitor was asleep. The speaker crackled again. Then a voice emerged, distorted, calm, the same cadence I'd heard through the wall. "Liam," it said, "almost finished." The speaker died. At that exact moment, every light in my apartment went out. The power failed. The heater sighed into silence. In the blackness, two things happened. First, the deadbolt on my front door clunked loudly, unlocking itself. And second, from the open darkness of my bedroom hallway, the humming resumed. No longer through the wall, in the air, close, tuneless, vibrating, filling the dark. He hadn't been breaking in. He had been here all along. The knocks were his survey of boundaries. The dragging was his movement through the bones of the building. The humming was his satisfaction. He was the December tenant, the one who comes with the deep cold and the long nights, who doesn't need a key, who exists in the negative spaces. And his process was complete. He had finished moving in. My hand tightened on the fire poker. The humming glided closer, suffocatingly near in the pitch black. I couldn't see my own hand. I could only hear him, and I knew with devastating certainty that the transcript on my screen was just a story. This was reality, not a burglary, but a claiming. The last thing I heard before I screamed into the void was the soft, wet click of a drip landing on the floor directly behind me.
I'm a single mother raising my son Ethan, who is now 8, though when this happened he was only 5 and I was 27. We live in a small house passed down from my grandparents, tucked away on the quiet side of town, and even today Ethan and I still call it home. It was Christmas season, and I had taken Ethan out shopping. We wandered through the mall, picking up gifts for family, clothes for my sister, tools for my dad, and after hours of weaving through crowded stores, I treated Ethan to burgers and ice cream at McDonald's. When we finally stepped out through the south exit, we ran into a mall Santa standing outside. He waved cheerfully, crouched down to Ethan's level, and asked what he wanted for Christmas. Ethan tugged my hand closer, and I allowed it. The man seemed harmless enough. My son said he wanted a Nintendo Switch, which, ironically, was already hidden on my shopping list. Santa chuckled, winked at me, and said, "If you're good, maybe you'll get it." Then he stood, turned his attention to me, and began complimenting me in front of Ethan. "Your mom's a real beauty, kid," he said. Ethan laughed, not understanding, while I forced a polite smile. We exchanged small talk about holiday chaos, and I admitted how exhausting it was being a single mom during Christmas. I even joked about needing Santa's help. That was when his tone shifted. He leaned toward Ethan and asked if he knew the song "I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus." My son nodded. The man tilted his cheek toward me, clearly expecting a kiss. I leaned in, intending a harmless peck on the fake beard, but he suddenly turned his head, trying to catch my lips instead. I pulled away just in time. His move was aggressive, unsettling, and far from jolly. I grabbed Ethan's hand and said, "Come on, let's go." As we walked off, he called after us, "Merry Christmas." That was the last thing I heard before we drove away. But when I glanced back at the entrance, he was gone. Later that night, after unloading gifts and locking the door, Ethan and I settled in to watch a Christmas movie.
Our cozy evening was interrupted by the doorbell. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I told Ethan to stay put and asked through the door, "Who is it?" A man's voice answered, "It's Santa." My stomach dropped. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. He insisted I'd dropped something from my bag and that he just wanted to return it. I refused again, demanding he go. Uneasy, I phoned mall management. To my horror, they told me no official Santas were hired there. Whoever he was acting on his own. That realization made me sick. I peeked through the kitchen blinds, but the darkness outside revealed nothing. Then I heard it, a voice bellowing "ho, ho, ho" somewhere beyond the window. I had no choice but to call the police. They arrived, took my statement, and promised to investigate. For a few nights, I felt safer, until the doorbell rang again. This time, I found a typed note taped to my door. It read, "I'm sure you know who this is. I didn't mean to scare you. After pretending to be Santa for hours, hormones got the better of me. You and your son are adorable, and I'd love to be part of your family. You can't deny the connection we had. I already know where you live. Now I just need your number. Text me, and maybe we can plan something. Sorry if this seems creepy, but I go after what I want. Happy holidays. Ted." I photographed the note, handed it to the police, and gave him his number. Days later, a detective assured me the man would never contact me again. I never heard from that creep again, but the memory still chills me every Christmas.
In December 2020, my fiancé and I had been living in our new home for a few years in a friendly neighborhood where everyone decorated for Christmas. Our neighbor Paul, a quiet man in his 40s, lived alone. He rarely spoke, but I often saw him outside. One week, his car stayed parked, blinds closed, yet his Christmas lights flickered strangely. I knocked on his door to check in. He eventually opened, looking pale, claiming he was sick, but from inside, I thought I heard a child screaming. Paul had no kids. I didn't confront him. Instead, I went home and told my fiancé to call the police. Officers arrived, entered his house, and what they found was horrifying. A young boy locked in the basement. He had been kidnapped from another town. The flickering lights? The boy had ingeniously manipulated them from the basement, trying to signal for help. Thanks to his quick thinking, he was rescued and reunited with his family. Paul was arrested, and given the severity of the crime, he won't be walking free anytime soon. One December weekend, my girlfriend Jenny came over while my parents were away. We ordered food, drank wine, and watched Christmas movies by the tree. I stepped out to buy more wine, leaving Jenny alone. She called me, frightened, saying she heard noises beneath the living room, the crawl space. I reassured her, but when I returned, we both heard a heavy thud below. I grabbed a flashlight and checked. The crawl space was cluttered with boxes, smelling strongly of urine. Something moved in the shadows. I panicked, hurried upstairs, and shut the door. Later that night, I woke to use the bathroom. At the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. I locked my bedroom door as footsteps approached. The knob rattled, and a deep voice said, "Hello." Jenny screamed. We called 911. By the time police arrived, the intruder was gone. But in the crawl space, they found puddles of urine, proof someone had been living there. Likely a squatter, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Since that night, I've never forgotten to lock the doors.